Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Fawn Pod, the Fawncast. It's friends occasionally not disagreeing. This is Cody, and I'm finally back. Oh my goodness. After all of the craziness of Halloween with another installment in my 60th anniversary series, James Bond Classic or Crap series that I've been working on since I don't even remember when, back in the summer, I believe. We are taking a look today at it appears to be our 21st movie in the series. This is The World Is Not Enough. Came out in 1999. We are 3 out of the 4 Pierce Brosnan movies in at this point, and this is oddly another one that I had the video game adaptation for the Nintendo 64. If you were a game maker and you had the success of GoldenEye, I could definitely understand how and why you'd want to keep pumping these out. But this one, I don't recall being that great. I know I sold it off at some point earlier as I was culling all of my video games. And there were a couple scenes in the movie that, I recognized from the video game, oddly, not the other way around. I'm not positive if I saw this back in the day. I probably did, because in my head, at least, I had this notion of Denise Richards playing a brilliant nuclear physicist, and that always seemed a bit of a stretch to me. But I think that's kind of one of the more, urban legendy comments on this movie, if you will, is just not the first choice you may pick to play a nuclear scientist, Denise Richards. But you have to remember this is 1999, and we are in Denise Richards Central at this point as well. Let's jump into this, shall we, ladies and gents? Here we go. All right, The World Is Not Enough. Start off with our categories here today that we typically do, the theme and the title up first. Let's start off with the music in this one. I have always had a soft spot for the band Garbage, and Shirley Manson's vocals. So I was excited to listen to this theme again. It's not one I've heard in probably several years. And after listening to a couple other recent ones where, I kind of thought like Aha, for example, was going to be like a 9 or 10. And then I actually ranked their theme a little bit lower just because it didn't quite fit where we were at here with the movies at the time. I thought this one really is a nice theme to match up with the Bond movie. It has kind of this like undertony, dirty, also kind of mechanically sounding sound to it, almost like a little of that industrial noise we were getting in the late 90s. And Manson's vocals are pretty well known, I think, at least in terms of those early hits the band had. But if you didn't listen to this one, or were just kind of thinking, oh, a Bond theme by Garbage, that is not so great, you'd be wrong, because this is great. It's quiet at times. It's sultry at times. She can raise her voice very high when needed, to hit those high notes. And overall, I thought this was a great, great Bond theme. She definitely knows how to make "the world is not enough," that phrase, stand out while she's singing. So that was awesome. And I give this one a 9 out of 10. I really think this is buoyed by a strong theme song. And it's surprisingly, maybe, but it's in my upper themes at the moment from the Bond movies. And like I said, hopefully when this is all said and done, we will take a look at the overall rankings in some of these categories, maybe on the last film podcast when we get there. But this is a strong one. As far as the next category here, the title of the movie, this is something that I have razzed on this film franchise for since we started this, because most of these, not all, but most of them after the first 3, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger, those were really appropriate titles for the movie. And then we just kind of went off all over the place. There were a couple standouts as we went through, but most of these have just been seemingly like this, amorphous phrase that they throw out there, and we're expected to understand what it means in the context of the movie. Not the case with this one, I'm happy to say. The World Is Not Enough is a line said by James Bond late in the movie when one of the villains, Elektra, we'll talk about her more in a second here, but she says to James Bond basically, I could have offered you the world, and Bond replies, the world is not enough, meaning he wouldn't, join her even for the whole world. And this is just a simple phrase, but it works really well. Like, you can give me anything you want, but it's never going to be enough to make me see you the same way after what you did, which we'll talk about on the plot here. So, very strong title in this one, 4 out of 5 points. This movie, surprisingly, is off to a fantastic start at the moment with the title and the theme. Let's talk about some of our performances, shall we? As always, here we have 15 points on our portrayal of Bond, 15 points on our Bond women, and 10 points on our villains of Bond. And let's start with Pierce Brosnan in this one. I thought Pierce Brosnan did another fantastic job in this movie. I don't know if he is like the guy that is meant to play Bond, but man, or maybe, I suppose there's again always going to be some of this what do I want to say, generational bias, I guess, where if you talk to somebody in like the 60s, in early 70s, they'll just tell you like nobody will ever be as good as Sean Connery. And I'm not sure if the people in the 70s are saying that they think Roger Moore is the best Bond, because I don't know that that's a commonly held opinion people have. But when you get to the 80s with Timothy Dalton, and then now into the 90s here with Pierce Brosnan as our main Bonds, hashtag sorry, George Lazenby. Pierce Brosnan's fantastic, though. He does the puns, he does the lines, he doesn't do them overly funny or jokey or try to make humor when it's not there, like it felt like some of the other Bonds were doing as they went through. But he delivers the lines very dryly. It works. He has a British accent. It works. He's very physical when he needs to be in those scenes. He's very he's good at the romance with the ladies. He's just solid overall. And again, in this movie was just solid overall. And so I'm gonna give him a 14 out of 15, which, if you're keeping track here, title has only lost 1 point, theme has lost 1 point only, and now Bond has only lost 1 point. We could be looking at the best James Bond movie of all time here, ladies and gents. Let's check out the next category. The women of this movie. But it's not the women of this movie, as I've been grading. Unfortunately for this film, it's the Bond women, which, to be clear, I have been grading since the beginning, as they have to be the lady that ultimately is helping Bond in the movie. And this is going to cause a problem here, because our central female character is a lady named Electra. And it seems as though she is going to be the Bond woman in this film, but we find out that that's not the case as we get the plot twists later on. She's actually one of the two villains, and we can discuss who the real villain is in this movie. But that sets up our second female in the movie here to be the actual Bond helper, the Bond lady, the Bond lust, and the Bond love affair at the end of the movie. And this is going to be Denise Richards' character, Christmas Jones. Dr. Christmas Jones. Just gonna throw that out there one more time. Dr. Christmas Jones. So we are officially back after about 5 movies with the ridiculous names. And I think I can safely say, though I wasn't there when they planned it, I think I can safely say that this was a character they created and named solely for the punchlines, which we're going to get at the end of the movie. More on that in a bit. All right, Denise Richards is capable. She is gorgeous, of course. Oh my God, if you were growing up in your teen years like I was, and Denise Richards was out there, and you happen to stumble across a little movie called Wild Things featuring her and Matt Dillon and Nev Campbell, and probably had some eye-opening moments for you as a teenager. She is gorgeous in this film. She's got a kind of a girl next door mixed with a supermodel type look about her. She's capable in this movie. She does do some stunts. Overall, I would say she is not, the most worthy counterpart we've seen for Bond throughout these movies. And one of the things that's really going to dock her score here, unfortunately, and this is, don't read this the wrong way, this is not a knock on Miss Richards herself, but she doesn't show up till about an hour into the movie, and it's only a 2 hour movie here. So we're also losing her for half of the film. So if you take in the fact that she's only there for half the film and also could do just a smidge more, I think, with her performance, have a little bit longer of an interactive and, rapport with Bond, would have been a higher score, but I have to give her a 7 out of 15. It is one of the lower scores, unfortunately, that we've seen here in the franchise, but that's mostly because she's not in the film a ton. And that's just, not her fault, but that's how we're scoring this. So there we go. Villains in this movie. All right, this is really interesting. So we are told at the beginning of this, essentially, we have a kidnapping plot. We'll get to here in just a second, but we have two villains. You know what? Pause that thought. Let's do the plot, and then let's go back to these villains and kind of discuss them maybe last here today, because there is something interesting about these villains. I feel like that is a little different than the other movies we've seen in this series so far. So pause on the villains. Let's come back to that. Let's do a little plot overview. I'm going to rely again on my trusty Wikipedia, which we just made our donation to for helping us out on a lot of our podcast episodes where we pull up notes off this. I did watch this over just a few days, but just because it wasn't in one setting again, and I'm not recording this directly after, I will rely on this a little bit to kind of summarize some of the main plots here yet again. All right, this starts with James Bond retrieving some money, and I'm going to shorten this part down here. Bond escapes with the money when there's a whole bunch of stuff happening here. He brings the money back to MI6 in London, and unfortunately find out that the money had been laced with some explosives that explode, and Bond chases an assassin afterwards on a pretty lengthy boat chase, and then into a hot air balloon where Bond kind of offers this lady that's there protection. She refuses and says he can't protect her, and that she blows up the balloon, kills herself, essentially. What we find out here essentially is that the money was brought back. I forget, it was something with like the security strips or something on the bills on one of the packs reacted to like somebody's lapel pin or something. And that's what caused the explosion to go off. And Bond had noticed this something because he touched the money. And then I forget, he got his hand wet or something. And that's how he was tipped off about this. But anyway, it's kind of a cool intro. All right. And then we're going to get the theme by Garbage right after that into the movie here. Upon doing some, we'll call it detective work, because most of these movies do involve some form, and I don't really talk about that because it's more secret agency, but there's usually some form of detective work here where Bond has to trace the lead down to figure out where something comes from. He's similar to Batman in that he's a blend of action and detective work and etc. Eventually, we're able to link this money to an old KGB agent who is now a terrorist in the world named Renard. And Renard is an interesting guy. This is he's a terrorist, but he has been shot previously by MI6. And so we get this really unique villain, which after 20 some movies, it's one thing I bemoan is that they have a hard time coming up with original ideas for the villains. But he was shot in the head by one of the agents of MI6 earlier, and the bullet is still there. And essentially, it is so far into his head that he can't have it removed, and it will eventually kill him. But the flip side of this is that he does not feel pain. And we find out later he actually doesn't feel any sensations, it seems like, whatsoever. Now, the money belonged to a guy by the name of King, and his daughter is a lady named Electra. This is played by Sophia Marceau, who is unbelievably gorgeous lady. Actor, I should say, actress. And Bond is sent to protect Elektra. And there's a weird link here now. Renard previously had abducted Elektra and held her for ransom, but we find out, well, let's not jump to the part yet here. But anyway, MI6 believes Renard is going to make another play on Elektra's life. So Bond flies to Azerbaijan, where Elektra is working on a new oil pipeline. And essentially, while they're out in the middle of the mountains looking at this pipeline, there are a bunch of, I'm going to read this quote here, armed paraglider equipped snowmobiles, unquote. So there's a good chase scene. We get yet another good ski scene here. These Bond movies are full of good ski scenes, man. They really milk the snow for all it's worth in these, and the water also, I guess, as well. So, all right. Meanwhile, Bond is going to visit his old friend Valentin Zukovsky. This is Robbie Coltrane's character, who, again, probably would know better from Hagrid at this point, from Harry Potter, who passed away recently. We saw him in GoldenEye. He's in the video game. He's in the movie. And while he's there at the casino to try to find some information about who attacked Elektra, we find that Elektra herself is at the casino, and she goes in and plays a single card game, one hand of whoever draws a higher card. And she bets $1 million and instantly loses it, and then she leaves. Bump. Which Bond finds pretty suspicious. All right, now, as we keep going here, Bond poses as a nuclear physicist himself, or a Russian nuclear scientist, I should say. And this is where he gets into Renard's base and also finds and meets for the first time Dr. Christmas Jones. We find Renard takes a GPS locator card out of a bomb and also takes the weapons grade plutonium as well. Before Bond can kill him, Dr. Jones blows his cover because she didn't know who he was. Renard steals the bomb and he runs away. And Bond and Jones escape the silo with the locator card, essentially. Back in Azerbaijan, Bond is warning M, this is where the plot gets interesting, that Elektra may not be as innocent as she appears. So if you're familiar with the term Stockholm Syndrome, there's this idea that if you're held prisoner by somebody for long enough, you start to become fond of that person, and it kind of makes you go from being the kidnappee to somebody who falls in love with this person. And that's kind of where they're at here. So they're thinking Elektra basically was brainwashed by this guy, Renard, while she was captured by him. And M is involved in this plot as well because she knew both Elektra when she was young and also Elektra's dad, King. So we have some kind of ties to M being out in the field in this one more than we normally do. Bond hands M the locator card as kind of proof of the theft that's going on. We have an alarm going off saying that the bomb that was stolen from Kazakhstan is headed to basically the pipeline inspection area. And so we have a pretty cool scene here. I don't know how this would work in real life, but Bond and Dr. Jones, who's needed to basically defuse the bomb or whatever you want to say here, hop into the pipeline in like a rig, I guess, like a cart almost, if you will, that's going through the pipeline, waiting for the bomb to catch up to them in the pipeline. And when it does, they manage to hook the two carts together, essentially. They attempt to defuse the bomb, I guess, and they find out that a lot of the weapons grade plutonium is missing. It's not in the bomb. And so they're wondering where it's at here now. But essentially, they let themselves fall behind. They jump off the carts go forward. A huge chunk of the pipe explodes. And this is kind of also a cover for Bond and Jones presumably being killed, which, she doesn't know at first, but then he kind of says who he is well before this moment here. So, okay. Let's see here. Back at the command center, we have Elektra with her reveal here. She finds out she killed her father as revenge because he used her as bait to catch Renard. She abducts M, and she as mad at her because basically M was the one who said not to pay the money to Renard, not to negotiate with the terrorists, essentially. So we kind of have this interesting behind the scenes plot here, which is why I said these villains are interesting. So what we find out is, yes, Elektra kills her own father. Renard and her stage the kidnapping. Her father doesn't pay the money. She's bitter about that. She leaves. She's going to now kidnap M. And then she's working with Renard. But it's really hard to say who the actual villain in this movie is because you kind of think it might be this Stockholm Syndrome, which is presented here, which would be a cool twist. But they kind of give us a double twist here, which is he wasn't really manipulating her. She used basically her feminine wiles to manipulate him and do what she wanted to do, which was blow up her own pipeline to make it look like she was innocent. Then later she's going to blow up all of the opposing pipelines, and she will have the only pipeline left at that point. So she'll get rich off of the only pipeline in the Middle East, essentially. All right, Bond goes back to Valentin Zukovsky's caviar factory in the Caspian Sea, where they're attacked with these ridiculous helicopters. I have to say, very few stages of a video game resemble a part of Bond more than this scene. Bond's like running down these boardwalks and jumping from building to building, and there's these two helicopters that are just flying through the area with about, I don't even know, 5 or 6 giant saw blades suspended below them, just like slashing and cutting through buildings and pipes and the boardwalks and everything. And it just really reminded me of like some boss fight you'd have in a video game. It was completely ridiculous. I kind of liked that it was completely ridiculous, but also tonally, this movie tries to play it straight. And because it doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the movie, it does seem really out of place. So there's that. Okay, back to Zukovsky in the caviar factory. He is drowning in his own caviar. He wants Bond to save him. Bond says he won't unless he tells Bond what Elektra was doing in the casino. And we come to find out that Zukovsky has a nephew who works on a submarine, and Elektra was paying Zukovsky to basically use the submarine to transport the plutonium, not realizing that what they're really trying to do is just have the plutonium explode in Istanbul and destroy all the Russians' oil pipelines. So Zukovsky was kind of getting played here by Elektra, is the bottom line. Okay. We get, and I didn't see exactly how this happened, but somehow M ends up with the locator card. I don't know if that was on purpose. I missed exactly what happened in that scene. I don't know if Elektra gave M the card or how, but M sets it up and it brings Bond to the tower, essentially where M is being held captive and Elektra is at. And as they go there, we have Bond and Jones being captured by Elektra's henchmen. This was at Zukovsky's base. Christmas Jones is taken aboard the submarine, which is now controlled by Renard's people, and Bond is taken to the tower where Elektra is basically torturing him with this kind of more medieval-looking torture device. Garrote, I guess it's called here, but essentially like you're strapped in, sitting up, and then they essentially look like she was pushing this bar into the back of his neck, which was just constricting his airway. And she's in there for quite a while, I would say, as well. So anyway, she reveals now that she was the one who manipulated Renard and came up with this plan as well. And she also cut off a piece of her own ear to make her kidnapping look really believable, because Renard would not do that. And we didn't mention in here either, but there is kind of like this tension between Renard and Elektra where she's kind of, sexually flirting with him a little bit as well. But this is where we find out again that he is unable to have those sensations either. Like the bullet in his brain is really cutting off all of his sensory emotions that he's going to have here. So anyway, Zukovsky and his men, who he survived, he comes back and raids the tower that Elektra is in. Essentially, Zukovsky is shot by Elektra and he dies. So goodbye, Robbie Coltrane. We missed you. And Zukovsky uses his dying breath to shoot his cane gun, not at Elektra, which is kind of what it looks like is going to happen, but he shoots Bond in the leg. And that is because it allows Bond basically to kind of use his hands and feet to escape from the place where he's at. And then he does eventually kill Elektra right after he frees M. And M sees Bond basically right after he's killed her. And she's probably shouldering a lot of the guilt on this, considering King was her friend, and she also was the one who advised him not to rescue her daughter for the ransom money, even though it was a setup, but you know. Okay, and then last thing here, we have pretty extended sequence. Bond goes down into the submarine as it is diving. He essentially frees Christmas Jones, and we have pretty long scene here where Bond is like diving between compartments, and there's water coming in and out of them, and Dr. Jones is helping him, and they're helping each other navigate through the sub as it is sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Long story short, down at the nuclear reactor down there, they fire the plutonium rod out of the reactor, and it goes through Renard's stomach, which kills him. And then the reactor is flooded and it explodes underwater, and Bond is picked up along with Dr. Jones by a ship that's passing by. And then we see kind of this weird infrared jokey scene at the end of the movie, traditional Bond here, where M and the other people at MI6 are looking at Bond on infrared imaging, and there's only one body laying on a bed. And then, of course, we see Dr. Jones kind of move underneath, and it's implied that they're having the sex. That's right, the sex. All right. So that's the movie recap. So let's do this up. Plot. Actually, it's pretty straightforward in some ways, in that, you know, it's a very different way to create confusion to make you the profitable one. So if Elektra had eliminated the rest of the oil pipelines, she would have had the last one left and become rich off of that. So all right, I said the word simple, but I really mean the beauty of it is how simple this plan was supposed to work, I think. The story itself is pretty complex, with not knowing whether Elektra is the villain or not, and if so, if she's working for Renard, and then we find out later it's more of a 50-50 agreement, or maybe she was even working for her. Zukovsky tied in all of that, and then the connections between Bond and M to these people as the movie goes on. Dr. Jones being in there. I just thought this was a pretty good movie in terms of keeping you guessing. Even like when Bond and Jones are in the pipeline and the bomb was going to go off, you know, you assume that's what the bomb was for, but then, oops, you find out only half of the plutonium is there. Where's the other half at? So it does kind of subvert expectations, I think, which is ultimately what I'm trying to say here. So really good, actually. I have to give this movie a 23 out of 30 on the plot. Enjoyed it quite a bit, more than I thought I would. That's definitely for sure. But I mean, even beyond that, it was just a general good movie. Action in the movie is pretty strong, as mentioned. There's a really long boat scene at the beginning, which I kind of glossed over before the opening credits, but it's pretty good little boat chase on the water. We have some of the stuff in the sub, although I generally find combat and actions taking place underwater just seem clunky because everything's in slow motion by nature, because you can't just move the same speed through water. As silly as it is, the scene with all of the saws suspended from the helicopters, that actually was really tense. It just really seemed like I was watching a video game. But overall, pretty good. I'm going to give the action in this movie a 13 out of 15. So pretty good on that as well. And then back to our villain category. That's a tough one, because on the one hand, I think Elektra is a really fascinating villain. On the other hand, she does nothing herself, which, you know, she's more masterminding this whole thing. But she's playing a role, I guess, in front of M and in front of Bond. And then Renard is a really interesting figure with the no pain because of the brain and the bullet thing, which actually, I don't know if, I mean, scientifically that could work, I guess, if it was in the right spot. And it affected the right areas in the brain. I think that could work if I remember correctly here from teaching psychology and different cases that have happened throughout history. So they're both good. Um, both of them also could use just a smidge more development. Bernard, in particular, has no emotions per his character and is actually only in the movie maybe 4 times. I mean, he's not in there very much for being the quote unquote terrorist primary villain. And then Elektra's in a lot of the movie, but again, she's mostly playing undercover for the whole thing. So I don't know. This is kind of a hard one to grade, but I ended up giving the pair of them a 7 out of 10. I thought they were good, but both characters in their own way could have had a little bit more going on. She was definitely a better character than he was. I mean, he was more the henchman, I suppose, now that I'm thinking about this. So I guess she's the primary villain. Um, yeah, she was good, not gonna lie. So thinking about this, I am going to drop 7 out of 10 on the villains as mentioned here. We'll stick with that. Favorite line in this one? Oh, I had one earlier in the film that I was going to use because I didn't want to use the cliche one, but then when I heard it said, I had to use it. It's one that, teenage boy me thought was hilarious back in the day because I knew it was a thing that happened in the movie. But when they meet earlier in the film, Dr. Christmas Jones and James Bond, she says no Christmas name jokes or whatever, and basically he's like, I would never. And then he says at the end of the film, when they're in the final scene, right before the credits, I always wanted to have Christmas in Istanbul. And she says back to him, don't you think it's time you unwrapped your present? And he said, oh, I think so. And then the best quote, though, is later on after that, where they're in bed together and he says something like, you naughty girl, or something like that, or something. And she says, what? And he says, I thought Christmas only came once a year. Oh, I took the low hanging fruit, but it's so hard to beat that one. It's just such a good line. I thought Christmas only came once a year. If you don't know that one, look it up. All right, our scores tonight. Action, 13 out of 15. Plot, 23 out of 30. Villain, 7 out of 10. The women, 7 out of 15. 14 out of 15 for Bond, 9 out of 10 for the theme, and 4 out of 5 for the title. This all adds up, ladies and gents, to The World Is Not Enough, narrowly, by our judging criteria here, edging out GoldenEye as the best Pierce Brosnan film so far, which I am shocked by, but by our categories, that's where we're at. We have a cumulative here of 77 out of 100. This is going to be classic, and the fans cheered. But more shocking is this is only a point off of being in the top 3. Whoa. This is a point off the top 3. So Pierce Brosnan is off to a solid start here through the 3 of the 4 films he is in, with a 76, a 74, and a 77. We have 1 to go, and that's Die Another Day from 2002. So we're going to take a 3-year break here before we come back with Pierce Brosnan. 3-year break for Die Another Day. And then, of course, we're going to get to the 5 films from Daniel Craig: Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die. If I have time, I may watch Austin Powers as well, just to kind of throw a comedy one in after Die Another Day, suggested by one of our longtime listeners, Matt. So thank you for that suggestion. And also planning to hopefully start my GoldenEye 007 playthrough real soon here. So we'll see how that goes as well. I actually don't know how that's going to be. I was going to say I think it's going to be much worse than I think it's going to be, but we'll find out, I guess. All right, everybody, that is it. This one should come out right before Thanksgiving to everybody. So I want to say happy Thanksgiving to all of our listeners out there. I hope your holiday is filled with lots of spirit and family and happiness and rest and laughs and good food and good times. So On behalf of everybody here at Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing, all the hosts that we have out there, our more frequent hosts, Dave's and Joe and Justin and Brett, and our collaborators, sometimes I hop on here as well, Blue and our other friend Matt, and occasional guest hosts we get on here as well. To all of us and all of our families, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Wish you guys the best in the last month of the year here before we wrap up 2023. Hard to believe that's the year that we're saying is coming to an end here. Wow. All right, everybody, take care. This has been Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing, the Fawn Pod, the Fawncast. We'll see you next time. Bye.